Contents. On my first slide, I included my design. I included the two different designs that I created, and I talked about my inspiration for them and how I came up with it all and the final product at the end. My second slide is the base layer, so I'll also talk about the method that I use as the base layer and examples of it and how I went about doing it. Each slide after that is a different kind of plant in the garden, and I categorize them together. So for example, cold weather crops all go together, and they include different ones. So in each slide, I included the crops that I planted, the location, the method I used for growing, if there was one used, and all the different structures that I use for this plant. My designs. My first design to the right included all vertical rows of different types of crops. Each section was a different vegetable and included a variety of structures to support the plants. Some of my inspiration for these structures came off Pinterest or just Google imaging them. I tried to categorize plants together that would grow well together and benefit one another. This is called companion planting. Another thing I tried to do was keep all the cold weather crops to the far left side of the garden where they could get the most shade, because cold weather crops need part shade, part sun. For my second design, I had to reconsider some things. One being where the sun actually rises and which parts of the sun will get the most shade. Considering this fact, I turned all the cold weather crops 90 degrees so they would be on the shaded edge, which is the blue highlighted line in the diagram. And I also rotated the trellises the same way as the cold weather crops, and everything to the right stayed the same for the most part. The base layer. Every garden needs something to start with, so for my garden, I chose a method of layering which adds to the soil and improves the nutrients that is present in the soil. This method is called lasagna gardening. For example, you could start your garden with just a base layer of soil, then add different organic materials that will then break down over time and add the nutrients needed. You could layer the soil starting with ground, adding cardboard as the weed barrier, then leaves, grass clippings, manure, compost, or straw. All these materials will then break down, adding to the soil's nutrient levels. When layering these materials, you want to alternate greens and browns. The green materials will represent nitrogen in the soil, and the browns will represent carbon. It's important that the soil gets these different materials because it benefits the plants. Now for my garden space, I used this method but didn't add all these different materials. I started with my ground layer, adding cardboard over top of the whole area, which is around 80 foot by 30 foot. Next, I added a whole layer of leaf mulch, this being my brown layer or carbon layer. And as the growing season goes on, I will add grass clippings around all the plants. This way they have the green layer, and it will also hold moisture into the plants and break down over the summer and add to nutrients. This whole process probably took me about 10 hours of time over the course of the fall and now spring. Climbers. Number 1, peas. For my peas, I use 2 wire trellises shown below. This way they have something to grab and climb up and grow on. This is located on the far left side of the garden where they will get partial shade in the morning hours of the day. For this, it took about 10 minutes to set up and about 5 or 10 minutes to plant. Number 2, cucumbers. For the cucumbers, I use the same type of trellis as the peas. Again, it gives support to the plant, allowing it to climb and grow. For these plants, I started them in the greenhouse so they will be able to grow better. This is located right to the right of the 2 pea trellises, and it took about the same time to set up as the peas. 3, beans. For my beans, I decided to build a teepee trellis. To build this, I had to take very small trees and stack them against each other to form a teepee shape. Then I took string and wrapped it around the branches, allowing to add support for the beans to grab and grow on. This is located on the bottom right corner of the garden, and this took me about 20 minutes or so to set up. Cold weather plants. For all 4 of these plants, I grew them myself from seed in my greenhouse and then direct sowed them into the ground. Broccoli. For the broccoli, I put them in the bottom left-hand corner of the garden. This way they will get the morning shade. Kohlrabi. For this plant, I put them right next to the broccoli, and as the growing season goes on, I will have to watch for cabbage bugs because this is a type of cabbage. For the cabbage, I also grew these, and these got part shade as well, and they're right next to the kohlrabi. And these also get different pests that I will have to keep an eye out for. For the Brussels sprouts, they are right next to the cabbage, and I put enough spacing in between each one since they get really tall and wide, so they will be able to grow well. Tomatoes, peppers, and corn. For this year, I planted 3 different kinds of tomatoes, and they include cherry, better boy, and beefsteak. All of these will have some kind of wire caging around them to hold the plant up as they grow throughout the season. And on the ground, I put black plastic down. This is the best kind of plastic that tomatoes need to grow, and it'll work great as a weed barrier in this area. For the peppers, I grew 2 different kinds, including sweet and hot. I used the wire cages as well to hold them upright as they grow. And these are in the same area of the garden as tomatoes, so they have the plastic underneath them as well as the weed barrier. And the hot peppers are at one end and the sweet are at the other end, so they are spaced out and I don't get a cross between the two. Different types of peppers need at least 30 feet of spacing between them to ensure this, that you don't get a sweet hot mix. For the corn, you planted regular sweet corn, and to plant this, I laid 2 extra trellises down that I had flat on the ground. This way, I can use each square as a space for 1 corn stalk. This creates nice rows and something easy for planting. Then I won't have to worry much about weeds when the corn begins to grow because it will block them. Squashes and melons. Zucchini. Along with zucchini, I also planted a similar squash, which is just yellow squash. These I started from seed before I put them in the ground, so they had a head start. These are located in the open areas by the beets. Patty pan. This is a type of squash as well, and I started these earlier in the greenhouse too. They are located in the same area since they're viney and will spread out. Melons. I decided to do watermelons and cantaloupes between the 2 trellises of cucumbers since this was an open space for them to grow. I started them ahead of time as well, and they will fill up the area where they are located. Some other squashes that I started and planted were spaghetti squash, eggplant, pumpkins, gourds, and butternut squash. They have another open area to grow since they are all viney, and these are all located within the area of the bean trellis. Flowers and greens. Zinnias and marigolds. The 2 flowers that are shown below, I also grew myself from seed and planted them all along the edges of the garden. This not only adds beauty to the garden, but it will also add some benefits to their types of companion plants. These flowers will work well with any plant for the most part. Sunflowers. These are also a beautiful flower, and it adds a nice touch to the garden and beneficial factors. These grow well with corn, so I placed them all along the edge of the rows of corn. Lettuces. For all the lettuces and my other greens, I decided to put pallets to use as rows and keep the lettuce up off the ground. The pallets are a new structure that I've never used before, so this will be an experiment. My experience with the project. My interest. I have a really big interest in gardening and agriculture, so I really wanted to take this project as an opportunity to expand my knowledge on this. I've had this garden area for around 3 years now, and each year that I've planted it, I'm disappointed with what I do with the space that is there. So this year I decided to design the whole space for my project. Setbacks. My major setback in this project was time and weather. It was always hard for me to find the right time to actually get out and physically work in the garden. The weather didn't help this year with the cold snaps and rain. Once I found the right time for it all, it worked out in the end. Another setback was placing everything and making sure it would all grow well in the spot. This will always be something that I feel needs addressing and figuring out is placement of crops. Accomplishments. My main thing I'm proud to accomplish is being able to fill up the whole garden space. This was my main goal, was filling up the spaces in the garden and finding ways to design and use new structures. I included a lot of structures that I'm interested in seeing how it all grows this season. Overall, I was happy to be able to do this project this year and really take my knowledge I already know and grow more on it. I enjoy being able to take what I love doing and share it with others and explore more with it. I'm very excited to this gardening season to grow everything I planted and see how it all comes together.